Well, it's an honor to be here and to meet some new folks that I haven't met from last time. It was great to be here last time. Um, and yeah, it's good for me to hear too, kind of the struggles and the hard things that everybody's going through. As I talk to pastors across the country, and it's not very many, it's like probably four friends in different cities and places. It's just really hard for everybody right now coming out of COVID to figure out what to focus on, how to lead. Um, and so, yeah, I just love everything you guys are doing. And I'll give the same introduction I gave before. But so Charlie gave me an hour and a half. I'm probably going to try and take around an hour and then any time left over to just fellowship and talk amongst each other. I was brought here to talk specifically about a book I'm publishing on justice. And I myself and our church was a recipient of the Manna Grant, I don't know, a bunch of years ago, and I think even recently, Robert Cruz at Antioch City Church in Highland Parks in Northeast LA is where we were for, my family was there for about 10 years planting a church. So I'll introduce myself really quick. This is my family, my wife Diana, my three kiddos. That's my son there who just turned 7. And I was actually really upset the entire photo shoot because he would not give a straight face.
That was gold right there.
Yeah, I was upset seriously the whole time, trying not to be impatient. So we started a church in Northeast LA. These are just some pictures. Bottom left, like this is the Peace March that we were part of. Bottom right, baptism. The space that we have. Top right, some of the women in the church. Some outreach that we did. And then, yeah, that was like our original core group. And church, when I left, it was probably like 80 or 90, something like that. And then leaving, some people left, and then COVID hit. But planted with the Cruz family, a Filipino couple, Robert and Joanna, who still lead the church today. And then out of that, we've always had, you talk about outreach, like huge outreach, justice focus in the community. And so we did a bunch of projects figuring out how can we be a blessing to the community if they're not going to come on Sunday morning. And so we did a bunch of community development type work, listening to the community and talking to single moms. And we ended up starting a public nonprofit called AMP Los Angeles, where we built out a space, an after-school space for kids. And that's and so the nonprofit holds the lease to the space, and the church meets there on Sunday. And the church isn't the only organization that uses that space. Yeah, and lately, so we left Los Angeles because of my health issues, asthma and allergies. And so we transitioned the church and then recently started an organization called PAX that develops content like outreach and discipleship materials for the next generation. And this is the group of folks that we got together for that. And so we have materials that we are trying to captivate the heart of the next generation in a meaningful way, which is hard to do. It's a hard nut to crack right now, like 30 and under, and how to meaningfully reach them. And so that's something that we're focusing on. More recently, and I share this because this is a part of my personal justice focus, is recently got a PhD in intercultural studies through Biola, interviewing survivors of the Charleston massacre to try and better understand what they went through. And these two folks on the right, Reverend Risher and Reverend Thompson, they're pastors and they lost loved ones. So trying to understand how this impacts their faith. And so that has to do with moving the ball forward in our country with race relations and listening to their stories. So recap from last gathering. I'm going to do this pretty quickly. So basically, big picture, I'm here to try and be a blessing to you guys that are already doing the work on the ground in your justice projects and your focus. And so last month, this isn't Sunday, I'm like talking like it's Sunday. Last Sunday morning, too many times preaching, right? Last month, I talked about Jubilee as a biblical concept that we can rest on when talking about justice. And we talked about the different ways that we can arrive at a language of justice or outreach or mercy ministry for our people. And by the way, all this will be shared with you. So you can take pictures or notes, but I actually get frustrated if I'm like taking notes while I'm trying to listen and ask questions. So whatever you want to do, this will be provided for you. And the deck from last month as well, Charlie can send out. But there's like shalom and different Hebrew words that talk about justice. There's Abraham's call to be a blessing to the nations. There's the Exodus account. You talk about teaching the Exodus and that being a grounding framework for helping our people understand justice. And for me, I think Jubilee is the best framework because it's the one that Jesus used. So very briefly, Leviticus 25 was the year of Jubilee. It was a massive reordering of Jewish society. All the slaves were set free. On top of that, we had all the land was returned to the original owners. Predatory lending was put on halt, and it was a certain amount of years, and there was this complete jubilee and freedom. And the land and the animals were able to rest, all of that. And in Isaiah 61, he quotes Leviticus 25, but then he's like talking about this messianic figure. And then we get to Luke 4, and Jesus quotes Isaiah 61, and he says this at the very beginning of his ministry. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. So gospel to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, those in prison, recovery of sight to the blind, healing, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Everybody understands he's quoting Isaiah 61, and everybody understood that that connects to Leviticus 25. And then Jesus, it's like the mic drop moment. He rolls up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And so everybody's looking at him, and then he said, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." So he's like, I'm the guy that Isaiah is talking about, and the year of the Lord's favor is going to be spiritual life and social flourishing. So what we understand Jubilee or justice is spiritual life and social flourishing. It's those two concepts together, which is what we talked about last time. And right now, especially with politics and polarization and everything outside of churches that are pressing in on what language to use and social justice, and I'm on the left and I'm on the right and I have this COVID stance and that COVID stance, we really need common language with our people to understand justice and mercy so that it's not getting defined by the culture. And Jesus does that. And so I talked about a disjointed gospel, some churches being all about soul winning, all about salvation, all about getting people baptized. That's great. That's the spiritual side. And then some churches are only about, we're going to reach the poor. We're about social justice. We're about our issue. Okay? Whether it's like racism or we're going to help single moms, and it's all on this side about social transformation. And it's disjointed. Jubilee brings all of this together. That's what's beautiful. That it is spiritual life and social flourishing. So holistic gospel, it's this concept that we can use in our church setting to help people understand that the gospel is saving people. It is people receiving eternal life. It is being forgiven of your sins. It's also so much more than that. How do we know that to be true? Because that's exactly what Jesus does in Luke. Right? So as Luke wrote his gospel, his manifesto statement was this, Luke 4, 17 through 21. And then from there, Jesus shows the people his gospel of Jubilee is spiritual and corporate and social and also individual. And as churches, and you guys understand this more than anybody because you have your Justice Mercy Grant project and you care about reaching and helping people, whether it's strict evangelism or you're like, we got to feed people. We're Christians. We got to do this. That's our call. And so I surveyed everybody. I won't read this. This is kind of the takeaways. I can send this to you. But in the book that I wrote, I created a justice matrix. And the whole point of this is I thought really hard about how to understand justice issues, hopefully so you don't have to think as hard about it. You can look at it and be like, this is helpful. That's the goal. Very practical, helpful tool. And so this is it. I'm going to skip back, but so that you see it, this is a, you kind of see it right there?
Oh, it's my eyes, not you.
So this is the Matrix, and not the movie, but something different here. And a matrix basically is to say that you can identify within your local church what justice projects you want to focus on. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. And I surveyed everybody last time as well, and 70% of you said, yeah, could you please cover the justice matrix next time? There's some other stuff that we could cover at the end if we have time that you also asked for, but I just wanted to tell you guys that. So this is a question, discussion as we get in, so I'm going to ask you guys right now, is it common for your leaders or your congregants, I didn't spell that word right, to talk about like justice issues? Is it common for you guys to talk about outreach and helping the social needs of people? Is this something that's commonly talked about and discussed in your setting? There's one thing about having a culture of talking about issues, but then there's the broader cultural conversations pressing in on your church, which, as you're speaking, it's like it's always been an African-American conversation, race relations. For a lot of other churches, it's like all of a sudden pressing in. So with George Floyd and COVID, healthcare is a justice issue. To say who deserves to have healthcare when, that's a matter of justice and mercy. And then with George Floyd, for whatever reason, it certainly created a national moment that was pressing in on churches. So I wanted to ask too, how has that been over the past few years? I know it's a way more pressing question, but it's important. How has that been in your setting, dealing with those outside issues? Yeah, so this opens up an entire different conversation that we won't have about how the church engages politically. The challenge with that, though, is we're already talking about justice issues. And so you guys have already mentioned when we talk about justice issues, it can become political really quickly. So I would want to call us back to last month, where we talked about Jubilee as Jesus's radical concept to get people behind to form a new community. And it's actually a new political community. Jesus was Messiah. His messiahship meant that he was a political ruler. We know that. Son of Man, descendant of David, tribe of Judah. These are all political titles. So that's a separate thing about the church being an alternative political community. But we got to talk about justice. And so the first thing is to adopt Jubilee as our framework. The second thing is, how can you help create unity in your church around the issues that you decided on? So you guys got grants, you're doing something with it. Everybody has all these issues. And I'm telling you, the generations coming up, like 35 and under, is your church focused on justice? And that isn't from like one particular group of people. Right now, that's from most young people. They're asking the question, where is your focus on justice? Now, some of you naturally do it. Some of you have to do it. Some of you are coming to that conversation, and this is a tool to help us with that. So at the very end, this is what we're going to do. So I'm just telling you now, and I'll give you time in groups. But I want you guys to tell us what justice project you decided on, so what you got your grant for, where your grant would actually fit into this matrix. We're going to talk about the matrix. So where would it fit in? And it's actually okay if it doesn't like fit perfectly somewhere. The third thing, tell us, is this a one-time project, seasonal? So that's like every Thanksgiving we do, that's seasonal, or ongoing, as in, we're starting a rehab house, and that's like ongoing. This is something that we're investing in. And then and we probably won't have time for this, but this is something that a lot of you asked for in the survey. How do you plan on assessing the success of the grant? And that's actually a really hard question for churches in general, what is success? Is it numbers? Okay, well, that gets weird. Okay, so is it relational success? People are encouraged? So, listen, this is like a golden question that churches falter on all the time. If we have time, we'll get there. But this is why the justice matrix is helpful. One, we have to adopt common language for your churches and your leaders. Otherwise, the political left and the political right will tell you how to talk about this. Well, you're into immigration, you're a Democrat. Well, you're against abortion, you're a Republican. It's like, wait a second, we can't let America and the government and the parties determine what platform we have. Yeah, I was just meeting with a team member, and she is from Central America, and in her country, my buddy Josue from Costa Rica, you take a long test before you vote in order to help you place where you think you should vote. And I found that to be really interesting. You take like a long test. In this country, what do you get? You get a handout from your party. It says just don't think about it. Vote for all these people and these projects. Like, wow, that's like, they're treating us like children, right? And that's our church members. We've got to be careful. So common language. Second, help decide where you should engage long term. Some of you already have that figured out. Some of you are looking to figure that out. And then number three, promote unity when the culture is pressing in on you. And in our church, and this is something I would say I learned from Victory Outreach as well, is to decide we're going to focus on something. We're going to try and do that really good. And we're not going to apologize for that. But that's also our reason why we can't do everything. Everybody has a passion and a thing that they're bringing in. So what are we focusing on? And this will help do this. So what I'm going to do is describe all of these quadrants, okay? So the bottom left, I'm going to talk about what prevention is. So, and I give some examples. Prevention work is where a church serves individuals, families, or communities that are vulnerable to injustice. So this could be sports, arts programs, parent-guardian support, family support, environmental care. You can think of different prevention issues. Food, making sure people are fed, because if you don't eat, if you know this about kids, if they go to school hungry, they're more likely to have a hard time. If they're having a hard time, they could fail if they're failing. And so prevention is very important work. And we have that on the bottom, okay? Second one, and I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. Intervention. So it's when a church serves individuals, families, communities facing an immediate crisis. And it's not just individuals, it could be a community. So gentrification, that's a community in crisis. All this investment is pouring into the neighborhood, and so people who don't have as many resources are being forced out by predatory landlords. So the community could even be in crisis, and you need to intervene. So you think of foster care and adoption, crisis counseling services, social services. That's intervention. And then reclamation. And it's not a word that we use a lot. You could use a word like rehab. You could use a word like that says things have gone off the rails in someone's life, in a community, and so you're trying to recover the situation. If I could say this, I mean, race relations in America, we've been forever in what does reclamation look like? And there's debate on what it looks like. It's so beyond crisis that how do we reclaim such an injustice and do right by the African American community in specific? So we think of rehab programs, post-trauma counseling support, neighborhood revitalization. Okay, so that's the bottom three. Okay, and then now we're gonna go to the others. I'm gonna pause really quick. Are there any thoughts or questions? All right. So local, regional. This is typically where a church will put their stake in the ground. is you're a local church, so you're caring about local issues, right? And so geography of Jubilee on the left, we did strategies on the bottom, geography. Local, regional has to do with caring about your immediate surrounding. So for instance, what we did in in Highland Park, Highland Park's 4 square miles and 60,000 people. You know this because of your neighborhoods. You drive 2 miles and you can be in a completely different world, right? Northeast LA has 6 or 7 different neighborhoods that have their own unique identity to it, so focusing in is important. This could be businesses, food desert in a particular area, homelessness, renters' rights advocacy. The second one is national. And I'll hold off on comments, but my sidebar is, this could be economic policy, immigration, mass incarceration, workers' rights, and we could add more. These are just examples. You could be like, well, why isn't this up there? Well, that you could add a ton. The national issues, and then international issues that a church could become involved in. Sex trafficking, global warming, refugee crisis, natural disaster relief. So I want to process this justice matrix with everybody a little bit. I know you're seeing this for the first time. What are some of the more difficult areas to engage in like for justice issues? When you look at this matrix, what are the areas that can be much harder to deal with when you think of your community? Let's just start on the bottom. When you think of preventing injustice, intervening when there's injustice, or helping rebuild something that's really broken. And then let's look at geography of Jubilee. So talk to me about the projects that you're engaged in, or what's accessible in your church in terms of what you can do, local, regional, national, or international. The point of this exercise is to identify what you do already fits into this somewhere. The challenge is, if that hasn't been a deliberate decision and been communicated well to your people, it can be confusing. Well, why are we doing prevention work? Why are we doing recovery work? Why are we supporting like an international relief effort with the refugee crisis when race relations are so bad here in our neighborhood or something? To me, moving forward as the church, it's important for each of you as leaders in your own local setting that you love and that you're committed to be able to explain, this is why we're doing what we're doing. This is how it fits into the work of God. All of this is valid. All of it's beautiful. All of it's needed. But to be aware of where we're focusing. So my thoughts on this and my experience looking in organizations, you know, so churches almost always end up down here, okay? For sure, local, regional, and I think that's a smart starting place, is to look around at your needs, which that's what everybody here has been doing. That's why you got your grant. Prevention and so it typically will grow in stages of difficulty. Prevention is typically the easiest. Intervention can be harder, and recovery and reclamation is certainly the most difficult. So when you think of the immigration issue right now, and it's a national issue, so where is that? I mean, we're right here, and the reason why nobody's touching the issue in Washington is because it's so bad that nobody knows how to reclaim it, and nobody's willing to reclaim it. Even though presidents have tried, Congress and the Senate are like, no, we're not going to touch it. I'm using that as an example to say it's incredibly difficult to reclaim something after it's been shattered. Okay? So think of that shattering and how do we rebuild that versus the vase is going to be broken at some point. How do we take care of the vase? It's cracking, so let's get it in a different building or whatever, and then it's shattered. And as you engage justice in your neighborhood, it's always smarter. That's not a good statement. When someone says always, go, it's usually smarter to start here and move to the right. It's usually smarter to start with something that's tangible, that's doable before things have necessarily fallen apart, and then to move there, intervention and reclamation. And the reason why, Victory Outreach is so good at the rehab or the reclamation, that's correct me, the mainstay of VO in terms of justice and mercy ministry, right? You guys obviously do a ton of different things, but what I've learned Victory Outreach is known for in the city of Los Angeles is you need to get somebody in rehab and Jesus, like, hit up somebody in VO, or the Dream Center, right? Well, to continue, I'm just going to talk about what we did and where I find it fits in. We found out really quickly as a young church in Highland Park, there were a lot of issues that we could address. Race relations have been poor in our area, even though it's like a Chicano neighborhood for a very long time. Gentrification is crazy in Northeast LA and really bad in Highland Park. And it's a nonprofit desert in that there are very few social services for families, and in particular for kids. And so as we thought what we could do, let's do an after-school arts program for under-resourced youth. So the type of kids that are in the families that are really nervous as they navigate the changing neighborhood. And so where that fits in for us, it's kind of two areas. It's prevention because we know that there's so much pressure on these families. And we want them to come to church. We want them to get saved. We want to baptize the family, all of it. But the first thing is to show them that we love them and that we care. And that we're the hands and feet of Jesus, right? And so it's super local and it's prevention. But it's also intervention work because of gentrification and what's going on. As the neighborhood is changing, we're intervening in the middle of all this injustice to say we want to help the families that are being affected the worst. So we're also intervening. And the silly part about a matrix is like this could all fit together and it all relates to each other. Like the global impacts the local. So global warming impacts my asthma in LA a lot. So the global injustice issue impacts the local, and the local also impacts the global. But before we talk about how it all can fit together, we have to be able to identify within your setting what is the work we're called to do and why. And then you develop that language for your church and you put your stake down. And that protects your church. So the group exercise. I'm going to give you guys some time to talk in whatever groups you want to be in for about 5 minutes, and then you're going to, you don't need to come up here, but say from where you're sitting, kind of the answers to this. So I'm going to give you some time right now. Love to know, we did this last month too, not last week. What project did you decide on? Where does your justice grant, and listen, even if it's not your grant, like the thrust of your church and what you're doing justice-wise, if it's something different, that's okay. Just tell us, how does that fit into the matrix? And tell us if it's a one-time, seasonal, or ongoing project, because that has to be communicated well to your people. And then I'd love to hear how you're assessing the success of that. How do you measure that? Cool? You guys have 5 minutes and go. So I just want to reiterate why I'm introducing language in a matrix to talk about our projects. And here's the thing, if it's not this, fine, you don't need to use the matrix, but what is your common language as you're discussing these issues? And how are you deciding where your focus is? And then that helps produce unity as the culture is trying to define what's going on, So it was amazing to hear. I do want to transition so that I don't take up the whole time to assessing your justice project. I was listening and kind of overhearing a little bit. It was awesome hearing you guys as you talk through these things, why you decided on it, where it fits into this. And I also heard some of you guys talk, it is messy. It's not always prevention. It could be something else. I mean, some things that the local and immediately is national, and that's okay. This is just a tool to help. And then it's so important to tell your people, is this a one-time thing? Is it seasonal? Is it ongoing? And then how do you assess? So I want to talk about assessing your justice project. I actually don't know what MANA requires in terms of reporting or assessing. So everything I'm about to say is just from me. Because I actually have no idea.
Hey, I was actually going to say, this is going to be really good. We don't really know how we assess it either.
There we go. Yeah, and so I just want to say that this is the way that through a lot of mistakes in doing projects, how do you actually assess? And so I just want to ask you, if you don't mind sharing, and if not, it's okay, but how have you gone about assessing the success of the grant, Christianity, your church? Like, it's all, seriously, it's all the same question. How do you assess as a Christian pastor leader what your like, did you hit your goal or not, right? Yeah, that's a question that you hear from a lot of churches. It's so critical. Thank you for sharing. If we weren't here, would it make a difference? And the question is, how do you measure that? So I'm hearing, conversion and Christians now leading those efforts from within the administration. That might be how you measure the success, how you answer that question. I love that. And then, yeah, do they even need this? That's a pre-grant question that you should be helping other churches think about, because you guys receive your grants and you're discipling hopefully other leaders in churches. And how do you decide what to focus on? You know, that's the question of, you're talking about going to school and asking them, what do you need, versus providing what they want. That's really good. So the first thing, and I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. There's probably like 4 more slides and I'm done. But I think within your organization, you have to have common language with anything like this. And so what does goal mean? What does strategy mean? What do action steps mean? What are desired outcomes? What are strategic outcomes? Okay, and I'm going to break all this down from what we did. So a goal is the overall thing you want to do. Strategy is plans to achieve your goal. And then the action steps, think goal, and then there's these big blocks, which are your strategies, and then under that is like the 1,000 things you do to get it done. Now, a lot of you do this intuitively. You just do this intuitively. But the bigger something gets, other people aren't going to do it intuitively. So how do you create a system so it can be done? Desired outcomes, what are your target results? And then strategic outcomes, like what are you trying to learn as a church? So I'm going to walk through this quickly, okay? So I'm borrowing this from what we did in LA, and this is before MANA hopped on to help, probably because I didn't know James yet, you know? But the goal was to run a summer camp for out-of-school kids. It's literally, we want to learn about these kids in the community. We're a new church in the area. That's the goal. So the strategy, these are the steps to get there. We prayed and fasted as a church. We did outreach at the recreation center. We set up tables. We raised money through partnership. We want to create a local internship opportunity. And then we wanted to recruit 5 musicians for the breakout sessions. It was like a glorified VBS, AMP Arts Camp. So, and then the action steps over those 5 things, and the administrative people love this stuff, which I can't you're like, yeah, let's develop that list. So all 5 of those, and you got like 10 things under each of those, and it's like, this is what we have to do, and this is when it's due, and this is who's doing it, right? And and if you don't have somebody in your church, there's management software for that too. There's 3 or 4 really popular ones that organizations and nonprofits use. And the action steps, like I said, it's a list of to-dos with due dates. So here's the deal. I do, and you guys hit on this as you talked, which is amazing. But you have to develop desired outcomes, in my opinion. And this is receiving grants and reporting. So there's the relational outcomes, and there's the numerical outcomes. And I mean, you guys, you both touched on it. One of you said relational, one of you said numerical. But relational, we wanted kids to learn art. So basic, just like learn something. I don't care. Have fun. Just have fun. And then parents are encouraged. That was just the goal, simply to encourage the parents. Numerical, we want 50 kids, we want 25 volunteers, and then we want to spend under. And for us, 5K was like, that's a lot of our church like savings, okay? But we're like, we need to be under $5,000. And that literally stressed out our leaders because they're like, this is a lot, Josh, right? So here's the question though, and this is a research question. How do you measure this? Okay? So, last thing. So strategic outcomes, this is important. This is what our church was looking to learn from it. We wanted to figure out if this worked well in our community. And we wanted to figure out if we should do this long term. So that's what all of our leaders are agreeing on. The strategic outcome. And we know that from the beginning because I'm like, hey, be sure to talk to 3 moms on pickup and ask them some questions, get their number, because we have to collect that data to know from them if we should do this long term and if they like this. I'll give a quick example. There was a church that decided to do a multi-site in our community. It wasn't a good idea, and they had a great idea in the wrong neighborhood. They did like a mini zoo in a part of Highland Park that nobody really goes to without doing proper outreach. And for me as a missionary coming into a community, I'm like, I'm trying to avoid this. They're spending all this money and it's really cool, but the community's like, we don't want this. We don't want this. So this helps. How do you measure the outcomes? So you guys already know this. You get text messages. You're measuring through text, and that's fine, okay? But conversations, you just talk to people and you ask them. Focus groups, all that means is like you get 3 people together and you say, hey, can I just ask you your experience about what we did in the community? That's called a focus. Don't call it that because they're like, I don't want to be in a focus group. But that's all you do is you get 3 people together, you have a list of questions and you ask them, and then you remember what they said. And then a survey. And surveys are powerful because a lot of people don't want to be honest unless they're anonymous. And even as a church, like we would have surveys for the church that are anonymous, have people fill it out on like a part of Sunday morning. It's like, we really need this. We know it's annoying. Take 5 minutes in the first song, fill it out. It's anonymous. And so surveys, and then numerical, you just have to keep track of like administrative data, right? So you just got to count. There's 50 kids here, and you write that down, and that's a part of the data. And yeah, I just would say own how you want to my biggest thing is just own how you want to measure it. If you're measuring numbers, then great, measure numbers, but be careful because that can bite you if people are discouraged. That happened once. We set a goal for an outreach. I was like, 500, you guys, I'm so bad. I'm like, 500 people are going to show up. Everyone's going to be great. And we had like probably 90 people. And so all the leaders were like discouraged. And I was like, yeah, I can't just speak it into existence, I guess, right? I guess I can't do that. Where, you know what, I probably should have trained the people to be like, the outcome is like you having a meaningful conversation with someone and praying for them. Do that for 3 people and that's success. And so you just got to know what your outcome is and to land on it. So the biggest thing is the language and to work from there, in my opinion. Desired outcomes and then the strategic outcomes are important. So yeah, before we leave, I wanted to give that. Do you guys have any thoughts or questions on this as we kind of close down the time? So for me, I'm having conversations with stakeholders. So that's your leaders. And those are your pastors. Those are your key people that you're constantly surveying. How do you think this went? What are your thoughts? You're getting that feedback loop. And then, for us, we went to key moms that have a voice in the community, and we asked them, what do you think about what we did? What do you think about the camp? It's Christ-likeness because it's cultural humility. It's saying, we did this project, we're trying to make a difference, we love you, but we want to improve. We want to be humble in how we enter, it's incarnational pastoring and community leading. And we didn't talk about it, but the solutions to your communities are already there, and you might not have the solution. It's with the people. And this is Dr. Perkins, CCDA, Christian Community Development Association, but his whole thing is, when you relocate into a community, you don't have the answer. They have the answer. You are not a white savior or a what savior coming in. They have the answer. So for us, it was no surprise that Highland Park said, we want an after-school arts program for kids. Because there weren't many after-school programs, it's an arts community, and they gave us that. Does that make sense? And so the answer comes from within the community, not from outside of it. And that's important for me coming into the neighborhood. For some of you who are from the neighborhood and you're born there and that's your community, it's a little different, but that also provides bias too. There's, when you do research, you're biased if you're researching your family and your friends in your neighborhood, but you're also biased if you're an outsider, right? And so you're biased no matter what. You just got to figure out your blind spots, and your churches have those blind spots too. I'll end really quick. Further resources, I showed this last week, but coming out the book called Everyday Activism. What's up? I know, it's very funny, dude. And then and then I developed a workbook that's free that I'll get to Charlie to send out when it's done, because it's not done. But it's 5 steps to integrate justice into the work of your local church, and it touches on a lot of these things. I'm saying you guys are doing it and it's already intuitive, but that's not going to be for everybody in your church. So it's important that we develop that language. So that's really it. It's awesome being here. Thank you guys for letting me come and share, and just really encouraged by all that you're doing. So keep it up. Yeah.